Under a leaden sky, the shuttle's engines roared as it cut through sheets of rain, streaking toward the alien coastline like a silver arrow. Salt spray from the crashing waves mingled with the storm, blurring the horizon into a single wall of gray. The coastline was jagged, the rock formations sharp as the teeth of some ancient predator. Somewhere beyond those cliffs waited the Galactic Confederation's High Council, leaders humanity had only ever seen in carefully curated transmissions. Inside the shuttle, the mood was taut. Ambassador Elaine Foster sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, the knuckles white from pressure. Her expression was the mask of a diplomat, calm, poised, unreadable. To her left, a linguistics officer murmured last-minute phrase checks into a tablet, while across from them, a security aide fidgeted with the strap of his holster. Commander Marcus Hale sat at the far end of the row, back straight, eyes half-lidded but alert in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. The others saw him as the head of security detail, an armed escort, nothing more. Few knew his record. None aboard had been told the truth. That Hale had spent 2 decades in the Navy SEALs, operating in theaters where failure meant not just death, but geopolitical catastrophe. His gaze swept the cabin with quiet precision, noting the position of every hand, the location of every visible weapon, the exact number of seconds between each subtle pitch of the shuttle in the wind. The diplomatic mission had been in planning for years. Earth had sent envoys before, scientists, cultural attaches, even trade negotiators, but all previous interactions had been strictly mediated. This was the first time an Earth delegation would sit in the Galactic Council chamber itself. It was supposed to mark the end of humanity's probationary period in the Confederation's eyes. On paper, the goal was to secure humanity's position as a recognized equal among the stars. Off paper, there was a sharper edge to the trip, the Council's growing impatience with Earth's independent military buildup. Hale didn't bother with the politics. His job was to make sure as many humans as possible returned home alive. He'd been brought in late, weeks after the planning had begun, under the guise of finalizing on-site security protocols. The reality was simpler. If something went wrong, he was the contingency. The shuttle rattled as crosswinds shoved against it, forcing the pilot to drop lower over the water. Through the viewing port, Hale caught his first glimpse of the alien citadel. The structure rose directly from the cliffside, as though it had been carved from the stone and fused with metallic spires. The walls shimmered faintly, each surface embedded with veins of light that pulsed in an organic rhythm. Docking platforms jutted from the cliff face like the perches of predatory birds. Even in the gloom, the scale was staggering. They touched down on one of the lower platforms with a muted thud. Armed alien guards awaited them, each standing nearly a head taller than Hale, their armor lacquered in deep crimson with gold filigree curling over the plates. The helmets were crested, the faceplates expressionless, and the weapons they carried were sleek, humming faintly in the rain. A voice came over the shuttle's intercom, thickly accented English, formal but tinged with disdain. Ambassador Foster, the Council awaits. Follow. The delegation disembarked in a tight formation, rain pattering against their coats. Hale took the rear, scanning every angle. The guard spacing, the lack of visible surveillance drones, the narrowness of the access bridge. He caught the faintest head tilt from one guard, a glance that lingered on the security detail sidearms. Not curiosity, calculation. They were led through a vaulted passageway that tunneled into the cliff itself. The walls here were etched with alien glyphs, the grooves filled with soft blue luminescence. Their footsteps echoed in the corridor, a sound made heavier by the oppressive quiet of their escorts. Every few meters, Hale caught glimpses of side passages sealed with locking gates. The chamber doors loomed ahead, 2 slabs of black stone inlaid with threads of silver, carved into abstract patterns that seemed to shift if you looked too long. As they opened, the space beyond swallowed them. The council chamber was circular, its domed ceiling lost in shadow. Around the perimeter rose tiers of raised platforms, each occupied by a different species of the Confederation. Some were humanoid, others insectoid or reptilian, their eyes gleaming like lanterns in the dim light. At the far end, elevated on an obsidian dais, stood the Galactic Commanders themselves. 5 in total, they were larger than their guards, their armor heavier, bearing symbols that gleamed with an almost liquid radiance. Their faces were visible, angular, almost statuesque, with skin tones ranging from burnished bronze to pale silver. Their eyes were hard, unblinking. Each carried themselves with the weight of authority that came from commanding fleets, not councils. Ambassador Foster stepped forward, her voice clear as she greeted them in both English and the Confederation's trade dialect. Her translator echoed her words in flawless cadence. Hale, positioned just behind her right shoulder, watched the commander's reactions. No nods, no polite inclinations. Only the slow, synchronized lowering of their chins, a gesture that could have meant acknowledgement or the beginning of something else entirely. The initial exchange was civil on the surface. The ambassador outlined Earth's readiness to integrate fully into the Confederation, citing cooperation in trade, scientific exchanges, and mutual defense agreements. The lead commander responded with clipped formality, noting concerns about humanity's unrestrained militarization and territorial aggression. Hale tracked the rhythm of the dialogue, the pacing of the questions, the tone that sharpened almost imperceptibly with each exchange. Midway through, a tray of crystalline vessels was brought forward, ritual refreshment offered to all guests. The alien attendants moved with ceremonial precision, but Hale's attention locked on the guard detail instead. Two more had entered through a rear door, silent and unannounced, their positioning cutting off the most direct path to the chamber's exit. A faint itch ran along the base of his skull, the instinct that had kept him alive in more combat zones than he could count. He let his gaze sweep the room again, slower this time. The balcony above, previously empty, now held shadowed figures, their outlines barely visible. The lead commander's gaze flicked toward them for the briefest instant before returning to Foster. The ambassador continued her pitch, unaware of the tightening noose around them. Hale flexed his fingers once, loosening the muscles, and shifted his weight subtly toward the nearest cover. If this went bad, they'd have seconds, maybe less. The lead commander spoke again, his voice echoing through the chamber. We appreciate the sincerity of Earth's approach, he said, though the words carried the brittle edge of a blade wrapped in silk. But before final accord, there are clarifications we require. Hale's jaw tightened. The cadence had changed. This wasn't negotiation anymore. It was staging. Outside, thunder rolled over the cliffs, the sound reverberating through the stone. The chamber's luminescent walls dimmed slightly, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Hale's eyes flicked to Foster, willing her to pick up on the shift. She glanced at him briefly, a flicker of unease crossing her features, before returning her attention to the dais. The lead commander leaned forward, fingers curling over the edge of his podium. Your species, he said slowly, has survived much. Perhaps too much. Somewhere above, metal groaned faintly, an unnatural sound in a hall built from stone and alloy. Hale caught it. He knew what it meant. The positioning, the numbers, the looks, it was all falling into place. The ambassador inhaled to speak, but Hale took a half-step forward, subtly bringing himself between her and the elevated dais. His right hand hovered an inch from the grip of his sidearm, his left hand loose at his side. The lead commander's expression didn't change, but the air in the room shifted, charged with a tension that felt like the moment before trigger breaks. Hale didn't know exactly what was coming. He only knew it was close. And when it came, he'd be ready. The first shot did not sound like a shot at all. It was a sharp crack that reverberated through the chamber, as though the air itself had splintered. A pulse of blinding light followed, lancing from the balcony overhead and striking one of the junior aides in the chest. He collapsed without a sound, his body smoking. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The diplomats froze, the translators blinked in disbelief, and even the alien guards seemed suspended in that breathless instant before chaos took hold. Then the room erupted. A volley of searing blue projectiles tore through the air, their energy trails carving brief scars of light in the dimness. Marble-like flooring fractured beneath the blasts, shards scattering across the chamber. Screams rose from a human delegation as they dove for whatever cover they could find. The Galactic Commanders did not flinch. They simply stood, their gazes locked on the humans, watching the violence unfold as if they were taking the measure of their prey. Hale moved before thought had fully formed. His hand closed around the grip of his sidearm, drawing it in one smooth motion while his other arm hooked the ambassador around the waist, pulling her toward the nearest column. Energy fire hissed past his head, close enough for the heat to sting his cheek. "Stay low," he snapped, his voice sharp and level. "Do not move until I tell you." The two security aides tried to draw their weapons, but hesitated, their training more ceremonial than practical. Hale didn't hesitate. He stepped from cover just long enough to place 3 rapid shots into the balcony above, the sharp bark of his firearm cutting through the shrill hum of alien energy weapons. One of the shadowed figures pitched forward, armor clattering as it fell to the floor below. The others shifted back, no longer silhouettes but armed soldiers, their visors catching the chamber's cold light. The aliens had prepared the terrain well. Every obvious exit was covered, the guard at the rear now advancing with disciplined precision, their rifles sweeping across the chamber in tight arcs. The flanking balconies gave them high ground, and the sheer walls left nowhere to climb. Hale took in the variables, discarding possibilities with ruthless speed. They could not hold the chamber. Staying meant death. Survival depended on finding a breach in the tightening circle before it closed completely. He signaled to the remaining security detail, a curt hand gesture that spoke in a language of years spent under fire. 2 moved immediately to cover the diplomats, returning erratic fire toward the advancing guards. The 3rd scrambled toward the right wall, searching for an access point, a door, any weakness. The lead commander raised a hand, and the alien fire slackened for a moment, as if on command. His voice carried across the chamber, cold and deliberate. "You bring soldiers into our council," he said, his gaze cutting toward Hale. "You dress them as guards, thinking we would not see. Your species hides claws behind its handshakes." Hale kept his eyes moving, searching for a path. "Guess you should have looked closer," he muttered under his breath. The commander's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. Then he dropped his hand. The attack resumed, fiercer than before. Hale leaned around the column, fired twice into the balcony on the left, forcing the shooters there to duck. He darted forward, crouched low, dragging Foster with him toward a fallen slab of decorative stone that had shattered under earlier fire. Behind them, a security aide went down, his weapon skittering across the floor. Another diplomat screamed his name, but was yanked to safety before she could reach him. The sound of energy fire filled the air with a constant, electric whine. The floor shook as a blast from the right struck near the dais, scattering shards of obsidian. Hale spotted a narrow service door half hidden behind one of the chamber's curved walls. Too small for armored commanders, but wide enough for humans to slip through. Between him and that door were 10 meters of open ground and 3 advancing guards. "On my mark," he said to Foster, his voice low and steady despite the heat of the firefight. "Run for that door. Don't stop. Don't look back." She started to protest, but the steel in his tone silenced her. Hale stood, firing in controlled bursts. 2 of the guards dropped, armor cracking under the impact of the slugs. The 3rd hesitated, giving Hale the second he needed to shove Foster forward. She ran, head low, her steps quick and sure despite the chaos. Hale followed close, pivoting once to put a final round into the guard's weapon arm before diving through the doorway behind her. Inside, the corridor was narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the tang of alien alloys. The walls were bare except for occasional panels of flickering light. Behind them, shouts in the alien tongue rose, growing closer. Hale grabbed Foster's wrist and pulled her into motion. "We've got about 30 seconds before they're on us," he said. They moved quickly, boots pounding on metal grating. At the first junction, Hale slowed just enough to check both directions. Left sloped downward, right curved back toward the chamber. He chose left. The passage opened into what looked like a storage area, its walls lined with stacked crates marked in unfamiliar glyphs. Hale ushered Foster behind a column of them, signaling for silence. He crouched, ears straining. The pursuit was close now, footsteps heavy, voices sharp. A quick glance revealed a vent shaft low to the floor. Too small for an adult alien in full armor. Big enough for them. Foster hesitated. "We can't just crawl away." "We're not crawling away," Hale cut in. "We're buying time." He pulled a compact charge from his belt pouch, a standard breaching device, reprogrammed for demolition. He sat on the far side of the crates, angled toward the corridor they'd come from. Once it was armed, he slid into the vent, pulling Foster in behind him. The alien soldiers entered seconds later. Through the grate, Hale caught the flash of their armor, the glint of weapons raised. The charge detonated with a deafening roar, the shockwave rattling the vent and sending shards of metal skittering through the storage room. When the smoke cleared, the corridor was blocked by a heap of collapsed crates and scorched debris. They kept moving through the vent, the space tight but navigable. Sweat trickled down Hale's neck as the heat from the blast followed them in faint waves. After several tense minutes, they emerged into another corridor, this one quieter, less guarded. Hale took point again, scanning every angle. He could feel Foster watching him now, really watching, her earlier composure replaced with something closer to realization. "You've done this before," she said. "More times than I'd like," he replied without slowing. "What are you really?" "Someone who intends to get you home alive." The corridor ended at a heavy hatch. Beyond it, faint daylight spilled in from an arched opening. Hale moved forward cautiously, peering out. The hatch led to a balcony carved into the cliffside. From here, the ocean stretched out in a vast, heaving expanse, its surface churned by the storm. Below, jagged rocks rose from the surf like the spines of some submerged creature. He scanned the cliff face, noting the ledges, the narrow paths cut into the stone. Somewhere along those paths would be a route down or a dead end. The sound of movement in the corridor behind them decided it. He turned to Foster. "From here on, we move fast. No stopping unless I say." "Understood." She nodded, and together they stepped out into the storm. The wind tore at them immediately, driving rain into their faces, stealing heat from their skin. Hale led the way along the ledge, every sense alert. Behind them, the hatch shuddered under impact. Alien voices shouted, muffled but urgent. Hale's hand tightened on his weapon. The path ahead bent around the cliff, vanishing into mist. He didn't know what lay beyond it, but he knew they had seconds left before the enemy was on them again. And when they came, there would be no more running without a fight. Rain lashed against the cliffside, the wind carrying salt spray that stung the eyes and coated the skin with a thin sheen of grit. The ledge was scarcely wide enough for 2 feet abreast, and the ocean's roar far below made every step feel like it balanced on the edge of a living void. Hale moved first, his weight low, each footfall tested before he committed. Foster followed close, her breathing measured but tight, the storm pulling at her coat with greedy hands. Behind them came the muffled clang of the hatch tearing open. Alien voices surged into the wind, sharp and urgent. Hale didn't look back. "They'll be armed, and they'll be fast," he called over his shoulder. "We keep moving." No hesitation. The path curved, revealing a narrow stair cut into the rock. It descended in jagged switchbacks toward a lower platform that jutted from the cliff like a shard of bone. Hale's eyes tracked the way down, then farther, beyond the platform, waves smashed against the base of the citadel, throwing up plumes of white water. Between the bursts of foam, he spotted a narrow stretch of shingle beach half hidden by rock outcroppings. If they could reach it, they might find a way to signal for extraction. The stair was slick with rain, the rock worn smooth under centuries of weather. Foster's boots slipped once, and Hale's hand shot back to steady her, his grip firm but brief. "Watch your footing," he said, though his tone carried no judgment, just the steady focus of someone measuring survival in seconds and meters. A searing bolt of blue light struck the cliff wall above them, spraying shards of stone. Hale ducked, pulling Foster into the shadow of an overhang. Farther up the path, 3 alien soldiers had emerged from the hatch, rifles steady despite the wind. Their armor gleamed wetly, the crimson plates streaked with rain. Hale raised his sidearm, sighted quickly, and squeezed off 2 rounds. The first glanced off armor. The second caught one in the shoulder, spinning him against the wall. The others took cover, firing in short bursts. Energy beams chewed into the rock, sending hot fragments skittering across the path. "We've got to move," Hale said, and they broke from cover, descending the slick stairs 2 at a time. Each turn the switchback exposed them briefly to fire, but the curve of the rock kept most shots wide. Hale returned fire only when it mattered, measured, precise, conserving ammunition he knew would run out faster than the storm. They reached the lower platform just as the wind shifted, carrying with it a distant, mechanical thrum. Hale froze for a moment, head tilted toward the sound. It was faint, nearly swallowed by the storm, but unmistakable rotor blades. Somewhere out there, a helicopter was cutting through the weather. Whether it was friendly or not, he couldn't yet tell. The platform itself was bare, save for a rusted winch and the skeletal remains of a crane long since claimed by salt and wind. Hale scanned the cliff face to the right, where a narrow track led along the base toward the shingle beach. "That's our route," he said. "Stay close to the wall. Keep your head down." They moved quickly, the path barely more than a strip of wet stone clinging to the cliff. The ocean surged below, close enough now that spray burst over them with each wave. The sound of pursuit was louder. The aliens were making up ground. Hale glanced back to see them, rounding the switchback above, their movements coordinated, their pace relentless. The first alien rounded a bend in the path ahead of his squad, firing as he moved. Hale dropped into a crouch, returning 2 quick shots. The alien stumbled, hit in the thigh, but managed to cling to the rock. A second took his place immediately, their fire growing more aggressive. Hale pulled Foster behind a jagged spur of rock that jutted from the path, sheltering them from the worst of the barrage. "They're trying to pin us here," he said. "We can't let them." He unhooked a smoke grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and lobbed it over the spur. Thick gray vapor spilled into the wind, swirling and stretching along the cliff. The aliens hesitated, their shots going wide through the sudden veil. Hale used the gap to push forward, guiding Foster around the spur and into the obscured section of path. The shingle beach was closer now, the slope gentling as the path broadened. The wind carried the thrum of rotors again, closer, heavier. Hale risked a glance upward. Through the mist, a dark shape emerged. A helicopter, angular and unmistakably Earth-built, its navigation lights blinking against the storm. Relief flared for a fraction of a second, tempered immediately by calculation. They were still cut off, and the helicopter would be a target the moment the aliens realized it was there. They broke onto the beach, their boots sinking into wet gravel. The helicopter swung in low, buffeted by wind, its side door open. Hale caught a glimpse of a crew chief leaning out, one arm braced against the frame. The man spotted them and raised a hand, signaling. A shout rose behind them. The alien squad had reached the base of the path, their rifles spitting fire that hissed into the gravel and splashed into the surf. Hale dropped to one knee, firing steadily, each shot forcing the enemy to slow their advance. The helicopter skids touched down on the far side of the beach, the rotor wash throwing up a storm of grit and spray. Hale motioned to Foster. "Go. Now." She ran, head down against the wind, her coat snapping around her legs. Hale backed toward the aircraft, firing until the slide locked back on his weapon. Without breaking stride, he ejected the magazine, slapped in a fresh one, and turned to drop the nearest alien who had pushed too far forward. Foster reached the helicopter, hands grabbing for the crew chief's outstretched arm. He hauled her aboard with practiced efficiency, immediately swinging his weapon toward the advancing squad. Hale sprinted the last stretch, the sound of alien fire cutting close. A bolt seared past his shoulder as he leapt for the skid, pulling himself into the cabin. The crew chief slammed the door, shouting to the pilot. The helicopter lurched upward, the beach dropping away beneath them. From the air, the scale of the storm was overwhelming. Waves smashed against the citadel's base in towering bursts of white, the cliffside disappearing into mist. The alien squad below shrank to red flecks against the rock, their weapons flashing uselessly into the wind. Hale leaned against the cabin wall, chest heaving. Foster sat opposite, rainwater streaming from her hair, her eyes locked on him with a mix of gratitude and dawning comprehension. "You knew," she said over the roar of the rotors. "From the moment we stepped into that chamber, you knew they weren't going to let us leave." "I suspected," Hale said. "Knowing's a luxury you don't get until the first shot's fired." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've got an armored transport holding position 2 clicks up the coast. We drop there, you get ground cover all the way back to the extraction point. Hale checked his weapon, reloaded again. The storm was still raging, and somewhere behind that veil of rain, the Galactic Commanders would already be planning their next move. The fight wasn't over, not by a long stretch. As the helicopter banked toward the transport's position, Hale allowed himself one last look back at the citadel. Its spires vanished into the clouds, its walls gleaming faintly in defiance of the storm. He knew this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, Earth would no longer be dealing with veiled threats and formal exchanges. This was war now, and they had made the mistake of firing the first shot at someone who knew exactly how to fire back. The helicopter shuddered as it banked low over the raging sea, rotors fighting the gusting wind. Spray lashed against the fuselage, streaking the windows with salt. Hale kept one hand braced against the frame and the other on his weapon, eyes scanning the storm for movement. Beside him, Foster sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the transport would be waiting. Her knuckles were pale around the safety strap, but her breathing was steady. She had seen enough now to understand the stakes. The pilot's voice cut through the intercom, tight with urgency. "We're coming up on the rendezvous. Transports in visual. Wait, contact on the cliffs. Multiple hostiles." Hale leaned forward, peering through the open side door. The coastline rushed past below, jagged rock outcroppings jutting like broken teeth. Perched along the cliffs were alien gun emplacements, their operators already swinging the barrels toward the helicopter. The first pulse of energy fire lit the gloom, slicing past the aircraft's nose. The pilot rolled hard, banking away from the blast. "Stay low. Keep moving," Hale shouted over the roar of the rotors. He swung his rifle up, sighting on the nearest emplacement. The shot was long and the wind was savage, but he squeezed off a burst. One of the operators jerked back, tumbling from the platform into the waves below. The others took cover, their return fire scattering wide in the turbulence. The armored transport came into view, crouched at the edge of a narrow road carved into the cliff. Its turrets swiveled, spitting fire toward the alien positions, each shot hammering into the rock in bright bursts. The crew chief slid the helicopter's door wider. "We can't land here. They'll have to jump." Hale was already on his feet. "Foster, you first." She shook her head. "Not without you. You're no good to me dead. Go." Her hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before she unbuckled and stepped to the door. The crew chief gripped her arm, timing the drop with the transport's movement below. At the right moment, he shoved her out. She landed hard on the roof of the transport, rolling to absorb the impact before a soldier hauled her inside. Hale followed, leaping into the teeth of the wind. His boots hit metal, knees bending to take the shock. A firm grip from the transport crew pulled him down through the hatch, just as another bolt of energy fire screamed past overhead. The transport's driver gunned the engine, the heavy vehicle lurching forward. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and scorched metal. Foster sat across from him, brushing wet hair from her face, her expression a blend of relief and grim focus. The squad inside moved with quiet efficiency, reloading, checking the feed on the turret, scanning for threats. Hale dropped into the seat beside her, his rifle across his lap. "We've bought some time, but they'll be coming after us. Hard." She nodded. "We can warn Earth, tell them what happened." "We will," he said, though his tone carried a weight that suggested more than just a warning. "But first, we have to survive the next 10 minutes." The transport rattled along the narrow road, the tires skidding on wet stone. The turret roared periodically, answering the fire from the cliffside. Each blast from the alien weapons shook the vehicle, the impacts leaving smoking scars on the armored plating. Ahead, the road dipped into a tunnel carved through the rock. The squad leader tapped Hale's shoulder. "Once we clear that tunnel, it's a straight shot to the extraction point. Your people ready for lift?" "They'd better be," Hale said. The first explosion came halfway through the tunnel, a concussive blast that rattled teeth and filled the air with dust. The driver swore, swerving to avoid the crater gouged into the road. Hale felt the shift in the air before he heard the second explosion, closer this time, the echo rolling through the stone. "Ambush," he said, already moving to the hatch. He climbed halfway up into the turret's gunner's seat, scanning the shadows ahead. Figures emerged from side passages in the tunnel walls, their crimson armor catching the flicker of muzzle flash. Hale squeezed the trigger, The turrets roared, deafening in the enclosed space. The front ranks of the attackers crumpled, but more surged forward, firing wildly. A round struck the turret shield inches from his head, the heat searing his cheek. Punch through, Hale shouted to the driver. The transport lurched forward, the sheer momentum scattering some of the attackers. Hale kept firing until they burst from the tunnel into the open air, the sudden flood of daylight momentarily blinding. The extraction point lay ahead, a flat expanse at the cliff's edge, the sea raging below. Above it hovered the silhouette of a larger dropship, its landing ramp lowered, engines straining against the wind. The sight was almost enough to let Hale breathe. Almost. A shadow passed overhead. He looked up to see two alien gunships dropping from the clouds, their profiles sharp and predatory. The dropship's gunners opened fire immediately, streaks of tracer rounds stitching across the sky. The gunships answered with a barrage of energy fire, one bolt striking close enough to rock the dropship on its stabilizers. The transport skidded to a halt beside the ramp. Soldiers poured out, forming a defensive perimeter as Hale and Foster ran for the ship. The wind clawed at them, dragging at their movements, while the roar of engines and gunfire merged into a single unbroken wall of sound. A bolt slammed into the ramp just ahead of Foster, showering her with sparks. Hale grabbed her arm, yanking her the last few feet into the dropship's hold. The crew chief hit the ramp controls, and it began to rise even as the last defenders leapt aboard. The dropship clawed upward, engines howling. Hale stood at the open side door, rifle braced against his shoulder, firing at the pursuing gunships. One broke off under the combined assault of the ship's gunners. The other veered upward, trailing smoke before vanishing into the clouds. Only when the sea lay far below and the storm began to thin did Hale lower his weapon. He crossed the hold to where Foster stood, one hand gripping a support strut, her eyes on the dark smear of the citadel vanishing into the distance. "You're thinking about what comes next," he said. "I'm thinking this isn't over. They won't just let us go. They won't have a choice," Hale replied. His tone was quiet, but there was an edge beneath it, cold, certain. Hours later, the dropship docked with Earth's orbital command vessel. The hangar was a blur of motion, medics rushing to tend the wounded, technicians swarming over the battered hulls, officers barking orders. Hale followed Foster down the ramp, both of them moving through the chaos toward the debriefing room. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter. A hollow display projected the alien citadel, the surrounding cliffside, and a grid of tactical overlays. Senior officers looked up as they entered, their faces hard. The admiral at the head of the table gestured for them to sit. Foster spoke first, her account crisp and precise, detailing the sudden attack, the coordinated nature of the alien forces, and the commander's overt hostility. Hale added what he had seen: the troop movements before the first shot, the calculated positioning, the clear intent to eliminate the delegation. When they finished, the admiral leaned back. "If this is accurate, then they've crossed a line they can't come back from." Hale met his gaze. "It's accurate. They wanted to send a message. So should we." The admiral studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You'll get your chance." Later, in the quiet of the ship's observation deck, Foster found Hale staring out at the stars. "You're not just a soldier," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm the last thing they expected when they decided to pull the trigger." Her eyes followed his to the endless spread of stars. "And now," he said, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They learn what it means to start a war with humans." Beyond the glass, Earth's fleet was already mobilizing, dark shapes sliding into formation, engines flaring as they prepared to depart. The storm had passed, but in its place came something far more dangerous: resolve.